My name is FRANCESFOX. I was actually born, we think, Ilselaya. I actually don't know who my mother is. The name I ran under for years was Francis Rodriguez, my father's last name Rodriguez. Supposedly I was born June 29, 1948. We don't really know if that is true or not. But let me start where my life got what I thought was really dark. And I'm going to explain to you every step of the way, in retrospect, what it is that I learned about myself, but also what I learned about living on planet Earth. I'm not doing this for myself, even though I think I'm going to feel a relief when this is over, this taping. I'm doing it for my children and for people who have loved me and have never really understood me. Without knowing my history, there's no way you could have understood me. In 1992, I reached forward to touch the arm of one of my children, and it wasn't their arm. It was like the arm of somebody who was dead. And when I checked, obviously it was not real. My child was there, their arm was there, alive. The therapist said that sometimes if we don't sleep well, our mind can do all sorts of things and play all sorts of games. It turned out it wasn't a game. It was a memory of somebody that had been murdered. And I had witnessed the murder. That sent me spiraling into what is now, since 92, we're in 2018, 20-some years of therapy. 20-some years of self-discovery and of finding out that I wasn't the person I thought I was because I had a secret second life. Today, a lot of you are familiar with what's now being allowed on TV, the show Stranger Things, the information about MK Ultra, and it sounds interesting, fascinating, adventurous. I have to tell you, it was none of that, because I was there, but from the very beginning. So I'm going to start with my history. I was born in Munich, Germany, the city where Nazism started. After the Second World War, my father, who was Cuban, who supposedly was recruited by the American intelligence from Ellis Island, was made a soldier, American soldier, and sent to Germany. And I was born there, from what I understand, of a German woman, even though he was married. A woman that was, from what I have been told, from a family that was supposed to have a lot of very powerful psychics. My father was involved apparently in a program that was a continuation of a Nazi program having to do with developing a superhuman being. Somebody with incredibly high intelligence, physically very gifted, all of those things that you've read in books, but that unfortunately were very real. So I was born in Munich. I was with my birth mother for 3 months, and I remember that. So nobody can really argue about that, even though the rest of my family doesn't quite want to accept that my stepmother wasn't my stepmother. But there is proof. I'm Rh negative. One of my parents had to be Rh negative for me to be their child. My father was not, and neither was my stepmother. Therefore, one of those two people was not my parents. And it's very obvious that my father was my father. So I was an illegitimate child and taken from my mother at age 3. I remember the moment in which my father took me from my birth mother and actually handed my birth mother money, which didn't feel real good. But the whole issue of why he took me is easily understood when you understand about this program, which is, of course, an extreme manipulation of what is a human life. There's supposed to have been 10,000 children in that program. Through the years, as I went through and retrieved memories and worked with many therapists, none of which had any doubt that I was saying the truth, I actually worked with a top mind control expert in the Americas who had no issue with what I was coming up with from my subconscious. And I pieced it together, and it took me a lot of years. It was very confusing because I had a whole second life that I was unfamiliar with, and that was totally not in keeping with my personality, not in keeping with what I would have ever chosen. I needed to understand that. And the first thing I did was seek out the nature of evil, because I was obviously caught up in a web of evil, of different groups of people, all who had evil intentions, who were maneuvering amongst groups of very nice people who had zero idea that these people who presented as very nice were perhaps not so nice. So as I'm going to the different religions to find out what is the nature of evil that I was involved in and that I committed, that was the hardest part of my therapy, under mind control, I came to understand that there was a bigger picture here, and that's the one that I hope that when you finish hearing my story, you will go away with. This is a planet of free will, a planet where your intention creates your reality. And when my sister told me that I had created all of these awful stories, some of which I'm going to share with you, I told her that I wasn't that dumb, that nobody could ever possibly choose these things. But she was right, because now that I think I have finished, I look back and I understand why it would have been chosen to be born into the US military, into their mind control programs, been good enough at it to where they would farm me out to different countries and different shamans, etc., so I could learn even more, in order to be able to understand what being a human being is like on planet Earth, and how you can get a human to do something that they would never do, and have them not even remember. This is not news. The news is my life, but the fact that you can make somebody do something they don't want to do is something that we've known forever. You've seen it in the parties where they do hypnosis. You're finding out about it now with the MK Ultra. MK Ultra is a name of a program, but that program was way later than when I was put in the program, which basically was since birth. The earliest memory that I have of any kind of programming training, even though I was born into a research hospital, was when I was 5. And my handlers, had me playing with some little puppies. And they were so cute. I love animals, everybody knows that. So I'm playing with these little puppies. And then somebody walks up to me and says, "Did you like the little puppies?" And I go, "Yes, I did." And they said, "Okay, well, you know what? If you don't let their mother, that German Shepherd, eat your feet, we're going to kill the puppies." And I was like, how's that possible? They hung me from, I don't know, a wall, a piece of wood, underneath my arm. If I extended my feet, the rabid German Shepherd would be able to reach them, and it was very obviously he would have bitten them. If I lifted my knees, the German Shepherd, supposedly the mother, couldn't get to me. You already know what I chose. I have my feet. What does that do to a person so young without knowing what's coming? That was one of many, many different things that was done, basically to break me. I wasn't the only person in the program. There were other kids, and that was a problem. Because if you left your heart open and you tried to help another little kid, the punishment was worse than anything that you could do. We were turned against each other. We couldn't help each other. On the contrary, we had to tell on each other. They would set up scenarios that were beyond belief, to where you ended up so confused. Basically, you chose not to make a single decision, to simply do what you were told without even thinking, which of course is what they were looking for. I was in Germany for 2 years. We left Germany. My father, my stepmother, my brothers and sisters. I never saw my birth mother again, nor did I know who she was, nor am I sure that my birth name is Celaya. And we went to Nevada. But it turned out that my papers were not properly documented. So I was made a Cuban citizen. I wasn't even Cuban. I wasn't even in Cuba, but I was made a Cuban citizen. And I was an illegal alien because I had entered without proper documentation from Europe, and I was put in the custody of my parents. So we were in Nevada for 2 years. Very interesting. Some of the stories I cannot tell you yet, but I think we all know what there is in Nevada, Area 51, and how there's a lot of stories that need to come out of there. It's not a coincidence that I was in the Air Force Base associated with it. The one memory that I have in Nevada was, I am sure part of the program because eventually I met other mind control victims and they shared stories. And I will not forget the day that my father put a rope around my feet. I would have been less than 5 years old, and hung me outside of a window and twirled me around. Severe disassociation. You don't know what end is up, which was exactly what the program was looking for. After 2 years in Nevada, we went to Panama. Whoa, dark, very, 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 very dark. In Panama, I'm not familiar with what happens today or what happens outside of the group of people that basically owned me, controlled me, etc. But in Panama, I'm not even sure that I should say this, but we can always edit it out. In Panama, there are a group of Indians called Los Indios de San Blas, who supposedly are cannibals. And the word is supposedly. I'm not sure if this was part of my programming or this was something spontaneous that my father did, because my father was very charming and he was able to get himself in and out of anything. I don't know today if he wasn't also a mind control victim, also performing simply so that his children wouldn't be harmed. I don't know that. We left Panama. We went to Tampa. I don't know if we were there a year or 2 years. And I was chosen to work with dolphins, with the scientists and the generals. At that time, they were planting devices in the head of the dolphins to see if long distance they could control where the dolphins would go. And they were experimenting. So a lot of times the dolphins would end up swimming upside down, and obviously they would drown. And then their little baby dolphins would obviously die because their mother was gone. I knew this, and I have to say that in spite of all the fear of ever showing any kind of anger, I was furious. I was around 5, 6, furious. And I had a scientist that was supposed to work with me. But I was ready to kill. And we were at a type of seaquarium where they had dolphins, and he really didn't believe in what I did. So he said, okay, do your thing. And I was like, I operated via questions and commands. I never did my thing. And I said, no, what do you want? What do you want? And he said, well, ask the dolphins what they want. And they started to throw themselves against the walls of the tank. I mean, making a lot of noise. And he got very angry at me, and he said, what did you tell him to do? I said, I didn't tell him to do anything. You said to ask him what they wanted, and what they want is to get out of here. Well, obviously that wasn't what he wanted, and he started to scream at me that I was whatever. He didn't believe in what I was doing anyway. And I turned around and told him, you are a very bad and a mean man, and your wife does not love you. She's with another man, and you're already sick. Because I was very psychic, and I really wanted to hurt him. I got escorted out of there very, very quickly, but I did have a little bit of vengeance against this man that was working and harming my people, because some of my sweetest stories in my very wretched life have been my relationship with animals and how they have helped me in times of darkness, and how they've actually sacrificed themselves so that I could continue forward. Apparently they knew it was important that I move forward and reach this point that I'm at today. So we left Tampa and we went back to Germany. Wow. Lots of stories from Germany. Obviously, their job was to create trauma, to cut your mind up in pieces, and then command certain pieces to do certain things and other pieces of you to do other things. One of the things they did regularly was to put us in a jacket that had a hook on the back, or that could hook to where they had the hooks where they had the big slabs of meat for the cafeteria, for the soldiers. Why? Because cold disassociates the mind from the body. And in that's what they were looking for, separating the mind, separating the different bodies. And in that way, they would have more control over the person. The person would not be whole. They would be incomplete and easier to manage. One of the more distinct processes they put me through, and several others, that's why I say we, they had a room that was very dark, and it had like big, felt like rocks in it, and there were no lights. And I remember that they would say they were going to be letting the dogs loose. They used a lot of dogs to scare us. And so they would put us in the room, several kids, and then you'd try to climb to the highest point so that the dogs could not get you. But there were always kids left out that couldn't climb to a higher point and were left right there on the floor that would be exposed to the dogs that were coming in. And it's extremely painful to be put in that position of choosing you or the kid that's there screaming that is going to get, it would appear, killed by the dogs. We humans have an instinct of self-preservation that's very strong, and together with them encouraging us not to be nice or good to the other kids because they needed to be trained to be strong, made that extremely difficult. I remember one night when I was taken out of my home in the middle of the night and taken to the forest in between the town that we lived in and the military base. And they took all my clothes off and they filled my body with blood and pieces of meat. And they had a German Shepherd that obviously had not eaten. And they put a blue ribbon around his neck. And they said, one of you cannot come out of the forest alive. It's either you or the dog, or you know what's going to happen. Obviously, they were referring to the kids that I loved, my brothers and sisters. And so they sent me off first, and I'm running through the woods trying to figure out what tree to climb, which was not possible, whatever. And of course, the dog caught up with me. It was interesting because the dog is coming at me and I'm defending myself, and I was an expert at that point in self-defense. But there was a point at which we were both, the dog and I, staring at each other, and there was an instant knowing between me and the dog that what was going to happen next was necessary, and not only that, but okay. And that what needed to happen next was that I kill the dog and walk out with the blue ribbon. And the dog just let himself be killed. Years later, a friend of mine who knows a lot about shamanism was talking about how the animals sacrifice themselves for human beings, that a group of animals will know that there's a tribe that needs food, and so that group of animal will go by the river side and be there, so that when the tribe gets there to hunt for food, the animals are sitting there waiting for them, waiting to be killed in order to help the humans. And I remembered that incident with the dog, with the blue ribbon. The dog and I both knew what needed to happen next. Fortunately or unfortunately, that put me in a position of being considered to be magical in my physical skills also, and in my ability to come out victorious against all odds. That is not a good thing, because that meant that they used me even more for more things. The time in Germany was very intense because the school I went to was for that. I mean, everybody else went to learn A, B, C, D. Meanwhile, I was so confused I couldn't remember how to spell the word the. But I was a perfect shot. I believe at one point I knew how to build a bomb. And I learned how to kill. There was, they decided they wanted, they wanted me to kill somebody with my mind. And they chose a young soldier who was ill. And I refused to do it. I could be very difficult. They actually called me the brat. The brat. I think probably I should be proud of that. And I said I wouldn't do it. I wasn't going to do it. That's it. I'm not going to do it. And we had a little bit of a Mexican standoff, and they finally said to me, what needs to happen for you to do this? Because you are going to do this. Okay? This is an experiment. We're going to complete it. You're the one that's going to do it. So what needs to happen? And when I checked, the young man really didn't want to die because he was ill and he was going to die. That's why he was in the hospital. He wanted to see his mother. And so I said to them, he wants to see his mother. Bring his mommy. Let him have his mommy. That's what he wants. And so they brought his mommy. And I completed the task. Where do I go from here? Because there's a lot of stories I could tell you, some of which, a lot of these I didn't even discuss in therapy because the therapists were very nice women. And some of the things that I said were so horrifying that they would go, oh, but that, no, but no. And it was obvious that they couldn't take it. I was traumatizing them. So I didn't share it. I guess it's suffice it to say that they taught me how to kill, but not just with the mind. And everything that they taught me, I had to learn to do with zero instruments, with zero help. Even if I had no clothes on, I had to be able to accomplish whatever mission it was, whether it was to get out of some place or to manhandle something or to pick up something. I had to be able to do it with nothing. That took a lot of training. But I certainly did that, and today I'm actually a very good psychic and remote viewer, and I don't need any instruments like cards or any object or any aromatherapy to be able to see something. So everything that happens for a reason, and happens for a very good reason. Even though it would have been really nice to know that then, rather than to be as broken apart as I was because of the things that I was doing that were totally against my nature. Apparently I was really good, and I remember they told me one day, I'm sitting in a little chair next to a desk, the guy's there, doctor or scientist or military, I don't remember, and he says, you've been recommended for the international program. That had zero meaning for me. And he said, look down over there to your side. And I looked, and there was a picture of my sister, my little baby sister, the love of my life. And he said, we're going to send you someplace, but we know where you are. We're sending you there. But we are also going to always know where your sister is. So even if she's on the other side of the world, we know where she is. So you need to behave. Anyway, I was sent to Tibet. The trip was very long. I remember that they bought a special coat for me. I was 10. Because it's very cold over there. I don't think they even knew where Tibet was, my parents. They weren't the one that was sending me. It was the government that was sending me from Germany to Tibet to a special training. And they bought me a special coat, my parents, but they took the lining out of it. The part of it that keeps you warm, they took out. And all those hours in that plane from Germany to wherever we stopped next, which I'm sure wasn't Tibet, I'm sure there were some stopovers, are some of the most intense memories I have, and it took me probably 2 or 3 weeks to kind of work them through. When I left my home, nobody even said goodbye because they didn't know they weren't going to see me again for a long time. And that tore me apart. Here I'm ready to die for them, to kill for them. They're not even saying goodbye. They're fine. They're inside the house. It's nice and warm. And I didn't even know where I was going. Then I'm on this plane. It is freezing cold. The clothing I had was enough. I could have died on the plane. But of course, I wasn't allowed to die. So I wasn't going to. But I spent a lot of hours developing a deep hatred for the world, a deep resentment, and with nothing that I could do with it. I went to Tibet to be trained by a Bon master. Those are the original shamans in Tibet. They were there before Buddhism came into Tibet. They specialize in magic. Okay, they're phenomenal healers, and they work with the elements. So I tell people I lived with an old man and his wife. There was no wife. It was just the old man and me. And it was interesting. He loved me a lot. He cried a lot when I left. But it was not easy. We lived in a stone house. It was freezing cold. I never got over the trauma of the cold. And as my grandkids always remind me, there was no toilet paper there. But that really was not a big issue because there were so many other bigger issues, such as him having me take my clothes off so his friends could see what a white girl looked like. My skin. Humiliating. A lot of self-esteem issues due to all of this. The most interesting story I can tell you about him was that he was the medicine man of the area, and somebody came to tell us that there was a woman that needed him. She was supposed to be delivering a child by herself at home with the family, the way they all did, but it was obviously not happening correctly, and she looked like she might die. So we went over there, and he wasn't able to do anything. The child was, I guess, stuck. And I, for whatever reason, and again, I always say, if you're in Tibet, you're a kid, you got the shaman next to you, and he says you can do something, you go ahead and you do it. Because magic exists, you can do it any place, but in a place like that, it's so much easier. But in this case, he didn't tell me I could do anything. I just saw the woman, and I saw the family so desperate, and my intention to stop this process in which two people were going to die, the baby and the woman. I told everybody to leave the room. I was 10 in Tibet. And they did. They didn't know why, but they did. By the way, when I was there, they called me the angel from America. So I must have done some very nice things. So I stood at the head of the bed, and I just looked straight down her body, the woman that was delivering, and I just all of a sudden saw a line, and it opened up. And the baby was right there. So I pulled the baby out. The line closed. The woman closed up. No incision, no blood, nothing. I put the baby under her arm, drew up some of the clothing. They didn't have washing machines, so it wasn't a question of finding clean clothing. There was none. And I called everybody back in again. The family was ecstatic, but my master, the shaman, looked at me with sheer hatred when he realized that I had delivered a child. There was no blood, there was no incision. It was like a miracle. I had created a miracle that he had not been able to. And I saw that hatred on his face. And it was shocking because I'm in this foreign country. I don't know the language. It's freezing cold. I'm with this old man. I don't have a place to go. I thought he loved me, and all of a sudden, it's an incredible hate. His face changed immediately. He congratulated me. He was thrilled. And we left to go back to our stone hut. But I didn't go inside with him. I stayed outside because I was in a state of shock. Not the fact that I had created a miracle. That was wonderful. That's what I intended. But it had his face of hatred that I had done something that he couldn't do, rather than being proud. An angel showed up. Huge angel. I don't usually see angels. And the angel said, "You see how humans are? He doesn't know that he can do that too. Everybody can do that, but they don't know that. This that you can do, they can all do. But you have to hide it because it could cost you your life." And I did. I hid my magical skills forever. And in the 90s, when people say, well, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? I go, no, no, no. I don't want to teach magic because I want everybody to be able to do stuff. It's not what I can do. It's what all of you guys can do. But the truth of the matter is that through the centuries, people that do magic, they're accused of working with the devil and many other things. They were burned at the stake for years, witch hunts, etc. So the angel was right. The world is not ready for magic, and yet you are all magical. You just don't know it, and some people in power would prefer that you not discover it, because that makes you what you really are, which is a superhuman. I was made to be kind of a superhuman through trauma. You can learn to become that also without having to go through the trauma, which is what I hope maybe my experiences will help for people to realize. For many years, I hid the fact that when I was in Tibet, I also was trained by monks. My master dressed me as a boy, put me on some, I don't think it was a horse, whatever it is they use for traveling. We showed up at a monastery. He knocked on the door opened, they took me in, and they didn't let him in. I don't know how long I was there. I do know they did something that they do, some of the monks, and shamans do that, and we know that throughout history. They put me in a cave. Was it a week? Was it 10 days? Was it 3 months? I have no way of knowing. You know those adventure movies where you go down this little makeshift ladder? They left me down there. I think there was somebody that was relative. They left. Everybody left. And I think there was somebody who came every several days and through some kind of a makeshift apparatus lowered food to me. There was no light. And my first memory of being there by myself was hysteria. Hysteria, complete hysteria. Maybe they're never coming back. And then after a while I realized, wait a second, there's nobody here. It's just me. What bad can happen if it's just me here? I'm not going to get raped. I'm not going to get beat. I'm not going to get tortured. My sisters aren't here, my brothers, so they can't hurt them, so maybe this is not so bad. I don't know how long I was there. I learned a skill there, I'm assuming I learned it there, in which I deconstructed myself and actually went into the mountain. Okay, so you don't believe that either. That's okay, look it up. Throughout history, people have done that. They deconstruct and then they reconstruct themselves in another place. This is not a novel concept or statement. And when the monks came back, I was not there. They had to wait for me to come back and reconstruct myself. I suspect I learned a lot there. I can't tell you anything specific because words don't really cover what your mind does when it has zero to distract itself. In retrospect, I found out through a very famous monk today when he was describing the different types of Buddhism that the monks that I worked with were most probably tantric monks, not the ones who follow the sutra path, which is softer and kinder, and they talk about compassion. The tantric path, they are compassionate, but they have no mercy when they want to teach you, when there's something you need to learn. You need to know that the stuff that they did was abusive if you're limited to your physical dimension. But you and I are not limited to the physical dimension. We have other energy bodies, we have a spirit, we have intentions. We come into the planet, we come into our lifetimes with intentions. And these monks were fulfilling and backing my intentions to learn, to have incredible mind expansion so I can later on turn around and teach it to you. So you can say they're abusive, but that means you're limiting your consciousness to a couple dimensions. If you expand it, then you understand and you go, whoa, that's very interesting. So this is all a plan. And everybody's working together, even the bad guys. That's the point. Even the bad guys are working together with the good guys. Everybody is working together to achieve intentions, all of which are ultimately for good. The head monk once sat across from me, and I remembered that memory when I went to a Buddhist ceremony, and I sat straight across from the head monk, and when he started his ceremony and his chanting, it was as if a TV set had turned on and the screen had opened up, and his voice was booming in my head. And he said to me, we're sorry for the life you've led and the life you're going back to. And we're sorry that your daughter's going to be born sick. Well, 20 years later, I had a daughter who was born sick. She's fine now. And he told me a couple of other things. So he knew what I had lived through. He didn't try to save me from going back, because that was my path. That was my life. That was what I chose, even though I didn't know it. But he had compassion, but no mercy, because he was fulfilling my intention. If there's anything from these confessions, disclosures that I'm making that I would want for you to take with you, it's that. Nothing really, really bad happens if you widen your lens enough to include what people's true intentions are. I learned a lot there. I learned about magic from a Bon master. I learned about magic from the tantric masters. I learned a lot. And then I came back to Germany, just in time for the Cuban Revolution, which was 59. My father was Cuban. So we were sent from Germany very quickly. We had no idea it was going to happen, but then they didn't know about the Cuban Revolution, I guess. And we were sent to Georgia, where I was trained by some religious people to join a team of CIA agents that would be operating in Cuba in 59. So when Castro says that the CIA was against him, totally accurate. The excuse was that my father had to go back, leave the military, and go back and pick up his father's business because his father was ill. His father was not ill. When we got back there, his father was fine, on his feet, and my father never took over the business. He traveled around the island until the Cuban government told him to leave. They knew who he was. I left the island from one day to the next because of some kind of a political crisis. My other brothers and sisters stayed behind. But I left because the Bay of Pigs was being planned in Miami in the Everglades, and they were looking for a female operator that was skilled, that was supposedly was going to be sent into Cuba prior to the invasion. And I was chosen for that. The Everglades, wow. When I remembered the Everglades, I said I was going to write a book. And the introduction was going to say, the only thing necessary for evil to exist is for good people to look away. Now I understand evil more, so it gets very confusing, these concepts. And the title of the book was going to be, There Were No Lawn Chairs in the Everglades. Because there were no lawn chairs, there were no chairs, and I had no clothes for 2 weeks in a camp full of men. The worst part. Apparently, I wasn't that easy to work with. Well, that's a good plan. At some point, I have to exercise some type of reaction. They brought a couple of my brothers and sisters and my stepmother. I'm laying on a cot in the Everglades, no clothes, all, I don't know, drugged up, whatever. And they said to me, you see, your family's here. They know you're here. They're not going to take you out of here. You're not getting out of here. So why don't you just cooperate? So at one point, they put me in the water in Everglades. You do not go into the water in the Everglades. You don't put a toe in the water in the Everglades. I'm into the water in the Everglades up to here, okay? And there's like, I guess a tree that was in the water. And they bring a baby. And they said, 2 of you cannot leave here. 1 of you gets out of the water, not 2. Okay? So you stay in the water with the baby, or you leave the baby in the water and you come out. Now, mind you, I knew there were alligators. You just don't put a toe in the Everglades water, and I was up to here. So I'm totally crazed. In retrospect, I'm aware now that I was drugged. And I'm holding this baby, and I'm trying to prop it up on the tree, and it keeps falling down. And I pick it up again, and I put it on the tree, and I pick it up again, and it won't stay on the tree. And there's a Marine standing there with his rifle. I'm in the water. This baby is not staying on the tree. And the head guy looks at me and says, whenever you're ready to get to work. He turns around and he walks away. Well, Eventually, I walked out of the water without the baby. So the baby obviously died. In retrospect, years later, with a lot of therapy, I now know that baby was never alive. It was a doll. I was so drugged that I was told it was a baby, and in my head it was a baby, and that was it. The mission was accomplished. The human mind is a very, very interesting thing. That was a tough one because probably when I started my therapy, it probably took 10 years for me to be able to realize that it wasn't a real baby. And when I finally accepted that, and then I went, but then maybe all the other things are not true either. Well, the other things are true. Certain of the worst things could have also been setups, but it doesn't really matter because the human mind reacts the same. Years ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that I recognized that it wasn't a live baby, because then I knew that you would think that everything I said was not correct. I've done enough therapy, I've done enough work, I've spoken to enough other people that have been through this, that I believe I've been able to distinguish what was a setup in terms of my mind and what it was that really happened. So, I didn't get sent to Cuba. I think somebody realized that I probably wasn't going to make it, or I don't know what happened. I did not make it to Cuba. I watched the Bay of Pigs from a TV set in my home. It was crazy in Miami then, crazy. And all the people that had come down from Washington to do this whole thing finally went back home. And I was assigned a handler who was Cuban, who hated me. A handler is somebody that you have to have contact with practically every day, because they're the ones that tells you what to do, and you have to report everything in your life to them. I mean, it's just a daily routine. That's it. You don't skip it. And then you have a control, and that control is generally a really important person, and my control was in Washington. I don't know where everybody else's controls are. But I was unfortunate in that I had a handler for 30 years who hated me. And they knew my programming. They knew that all they had to do was mention a brother or sister, and then later on when I had children, to mention children, and they could basically get anything they wanted from me. And unfortunately, a lot of what they wanted from me had nothing to do with politics. Nothing to do with politics. It was like having a little robot at your command. Now, I wasn't the only person, but right now I'm talking about me. Okay? During the Bay of Pigs, no, after the Bay of Pigs, if I neglected to tell you, let me say now, that I was trained by 3 separate people in sex. Actually, I think I should say this. Actually, I think I'm not going to say this because it's too heavy duty. And it didn't involve anybody dying. It did involve a poor kid getting her teeth knocked out because she wasn't great in sex. The problem is she was 8 years old. She didn't even understand the concept of sex. So, but the rest of it I'm not going to go into because it's too messy. So, I'm here in Miami. The Bay of Pigs is over, but not really, because the Bay of Pigs never finished for people who live in Miami. And I was set up to have sex with Kennedy. I was between 12 and 14. I honestly don't know how old I was. He died when I was 14, so I know it was obviously before then. And it happened more than once and more than twice and more than 3 times. It's very easy to get from Miami to Washington. You know, they pick you up at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They take you to the military base. I'm assuming it was Opalaca. Put you on a plane. You're almost the only person sitting there. You go, you get delivered, whatever, and then you get picked up again and you get brought down. I had first met Kennedy because I was a demo for the program. What does that mean? It means that when they were soliciting funds for this program, which they said was a program for eventually educating American children to have a mind expansion and higher IQs. This program would, the experiments would be able to help American kids. So I was used as a demo in that I would present it to people from the Appropriations Committee, and I was presented to Kennedy. And in that process, it was set up that that I would sleep with him. He was a nice man. Having slept with him was problematic because he was assassinated. Whoa, I was a psychic spy. He didn't know that. I was a child between 12 and 14. He didn't know that either. The people who set me up with him knew that. So once he got killed, everybody went into crisis mode. Within hours, they had cut off all my hair. I had very long, luxurious hair. They cut it super short. Was never allowed to have long hair again. And I was basically never allowed to leave Miami again. So all my plans for going away to school, the whole 9 yards, everything got truncated in the fear that somebody might recognize me and that they would start to ask questions. And everybody that was kind of involved in getting me up there, which was a lot of people in the intelligence community, were freaking out. I don't understand why they didn't kill me. Honestly, I don't understand. It would have been easier. They felt I was a loose end. So I don't know why they didn't, but they didn't. Okay. I got so massively depressed when he was killed. I couldn't move. And my control came down from Washington. And he said, what's the matter? And I said, I don't know. I can't move. I can't move. And he realized that I was probably suicidal. So he put in an anti-suicide program, which I think I had put in before, which was, through hypnosis, you cannot kill yourself, you cannot die, you cannot throw yourself in front of a truck, you cannot get sick of a disease that's going to kill you. You are not allowed to die. That's it. It's over. So my point of exit, which all of us have available to us, which is to kill ourselves, I did not have. So the next few years are relatively uneventful. There's stuff that I'm not going to share because it's not in the history books yet, and it's really not my story to tell. I'm not interested. I want to go now to the end, but before then, let me finish. I got married. I went to University of Miami. I got a degree in political science, which was really weird because I was totally non-political, but makes sense with a part of my life that where I was involved with all these politicians, all of these military. Up to that point, I had no bleed through. I did not know any of this. I was walking around, me, okay? And there was another me that if somebody put in a phone call, I would respond to and sometimes do some awful things. So I got married and I got pregnant. And apparently that wasn't part of my programming. So my control came down from Washington and said, what are you doing? I already knew he knew that I was pregnant. And basically he terminated the pregnancy. Basically my first child was murdered. That doesn't leave you in a very good position when you are allowed to get pregnant and have a child and then have a second one. Basically, after that, you don't trust anything because there's always been a lot of threats, but most of them were never followed through because, of course, I behaved. In that particular case, I did something I wasn't supposed to do and they terminated a life. So I think I walked a very straight line for decades between the handler that hated me and the murder of my first pregnancy. And then years later, I leaned forward to touch one of my children's arms, and I had a memory that was triggered. And that set me spinning into a very large dark hole from the 90s in which I started to retrieve memories. I worked with a regular therapist who bumped me over into a therapist who specialized in sexual abuse. Then I was put into a group therapy of sexual abuse victims. I was basically taken out of that because my stories were too awful and everybody went into shock. And then they turned me over to a therapist who specialized in torture victims and prisoners of wars. That's the psychological therapist that I ended up with. But at that time, I retrieved the memory of having had sex with Kennedy, plus the little baby on the tree that ended up not being but a doll. And my therapist got very concerned because she said that our medical system is lovely. She said that the therapist could not take care of people that were still in danger, and it was obvious I was still caught up with these people, so they couldn't take care of me. I said, you can't drop me, I need help. She said, well, you need to go and speak to a specialist. So they set me up, and I did go to see the #1 specialist in North America for military mind control victims, and worked with him for 10 days. And he told me that my programming was incredibly sophisticated and that he wouldn't even know how to begin to deprogram me. I came back to Miami. My therapist took me back again, and we continued. I went to lawyers because I was still getting sexually abused, blackmailed, etc. by the intelligence community in Miami. I never got paid ever, ever for anything. And I wanted it to stop. And actually, my control in '92 said, you know what, I think we can put a stop to it this way. That's how out of control the intelligence community is, that the big guy in Washington couldn't get them to stop their behavior. He said, institute a lawsuit. For what? I said, sexual abuse. I said, against who? All of them? He said, no. These specific people. And there was another woman that had also been abused by them. She was also coerced, so we started a lawsuit in the '90s for sexual abuse, for stuff that had happened years before. And I actually had a group called the Amigos de la Corte, which is a nonprofit group that supports lawsuits that they think have value for society. The lawsuit had to be dropped because of time issues, etc. I did not become a favorite person of the intelligence community here because I was taking them to court. Not my idea. So now with all the sexual abuse allegations that are in the news, the fact that I took them to court or started the process in the '90s has not put me in a very lovely position. It's actually been very dangerous and very scary, and it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this sharing. I believe that all of this is going to stop because I don't need any of this anymore. I already learned what I needed to learn. I'm already teaching what I need to teach. I don't need to be afraid anymore. I don't need it. If I had come out with this information before, it would have cost me my life. That's not going to happen now. So now I can be a free person. I can share this with you. I can get my book out to you, and you can learn what it is that I learned under incredibly difficult circumstances. But I can say in retrospect, I am not sorry that I chose this life. It's been fascinating, incredibly painful. But I'm not sorry because I accomplished my mission. I did it. And you too have a mission. And when you get in contact with that, even if you don't know the specifics, you're going to find yourself a lot happier. In order to be able to to understand yourself, you need to know that you're more than just one thing. There's pieces of you all over the place, and you need to collect them and bring them back home, which is what I've been doing since '92.